Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 16th episode of the Deep Fried Neurons podcast. And I really have to apologize in advance for the little sparrow noises somewhere in the middle of the recording. And you'll have to bear with me for that one, but that's about it. And, I'm gonna cue the fucking. Two of the best novels I've come across in my life are 1984 by George Orwell or Eric Arthur Blair and Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. If you haven't read these books, I highly recommend you do. Both these books are dystopian works of fiction and are regarded as hallmark pieces of literature in dystopian fiction, and one of them also in political commentary. Both of them largely explore the implications of threats to and death of individuality and free will. 1984 manufactures consent by destroying and reconstructing truth through mass surveillance and coercion, whereas Brave New World takes on one-time surrender of consent in the idea of utopian society, giving into mass drug administration, after which the government has absolute control as the people are incapacitated to criticize it. Both of these authors were visionary in predicting these outcomes of human society, as they came true in the form of two of the world's biggest superpowers in the world right after the Second World War. Of course, it wasn't as big or nearly as successful as the novel portrayed it to be, but it painted a pretty detailed and crystallized picture of these societies. 1984, to be fair, could have been Orwell's commentary on Stalin as a headpiece when talking about authoritarianism, because Stalin had secured power in 1930 and the novel was written in 1948, 18 years later. I mean, I don't know if he started securing power in the 24 or something like that. By 1930 he had absolute power. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Orwell was just able to picturize what a government of an authoritarian strongman like Stalin was like from what he understood about the USSR. Stalin's acquisition of grain, with complete knowledge of how many civilians he left starving, should have been a hint. It didn't stop with Stalin at all. Civilian lives and rights were revealed to be the second priority of the USSR throughout its lifetime. In the book, the employees of the state were constantly arrested and erased from existence for menial crimes against the state. The Soviet Union has a history of erasing and censoring people from its own history. Nikolai Yezhov was doctored out of a picture with Stalin after suspected disloyalty. Trotsky was erased out of Lenin's speech photo in 1917 after he was declared the enemy of the state during Stalin's rise to power. Alexander Machenko faced the same fate when they were taking a photo of the founding fathers. These were few of the many accounts of USSR manufacturing their own version of the truth. The Soviet Union also had a notorious history of declaring any suspected enemy of the state as a spy and bringing them into the Gulag. Verified accounts of civilians being caught in these incidents have been recorded. Weird stories would have parallels between the novel and Soviet Union would run until today. Given the cover of Putin's government and his stronghold on the country with his masterful control on information and consistent capability to appeal to his population along with his background as a spy, only drives the story of 2 + 2 = 5 in Russia home. Constant censorship, warmongering, annexations, suppressing LGBT rights, making journalists disappear, messing with the elections, while still having firm grip on the presidential office convinces me that the Russian days of authoritarian government are here for a while, and the government is skilled at doing what it does. Now, of course, a certain northern province of Korea also comes to mind when you think about 1984. And actually, that's much closer to the novel. Dare I say it is the novel. They even have those sanctioned haircuts. I'd like to spend the rest and a very significant part of this episode discussing Aldous Huxley's book, The Brave New World, and the USA, because USA has built its international appeal by appearing as an advocate for freedom, truth, justice, and the American way. And it straight went into overdrive to get first to the Brave New World, right after the Second World War. There are theories speculating that the Americans got the idea of their mass mind control from the book itself, because it was written in 1931. However, that's just a theory. The reason Americans tried to recreate the novel is because of their fear of being behind USSR. Most experts who have talked about the MK Ultra project have stated the Moscow show trials as the first domino that would lead the American government where it is. They wanted to be ahead of the curve and perfect the technology as the USSR was getting ahead of them. The 30s with Stalin in power in the East scared the Americans after the Moscow show trials, because not only did they have a vast army, technological prowess, but also given how quickly Trotskyists, that's hard to say. You get the point. Confessed to being the enemy of the state and begged to be executed, the West was sure mind control was at work. But at the time they could not have confirmed it, not to forget that shortly after the trials, the Second World War broke out and they had more immediate matters at hand. But the Americans kept gathering intel and piecing towards the fact that USSR, the Japanese and the Germans were all experimenting on an industrial scale to perfect mind control. The Japanese were trying mind control on the POWs, prisoners of war, USSR on its political prisoners, and the Germans were perfecting mind control alongside other Ubermensch experiments in the concentration camps in Jewish ghettos. So the newly established Office of Strategic Services, OSS, felt justified to experiment with truth serums on German prisoners of war. These were pretty loose. Times were desperate, from what the army accounts say. But after the war, the UNHRC was established, and everybody was to abide by what is called the Nuremberg Code for research, which specified that the voluntary consent had to be secured before testing was performed on humans. Given how World War II turned out, the USSR was the only country that the USA could not confirm was abiding by this code. The USA abides by this code right up till 1949. Another trials happens in Hungary, and America is now again suspicious of mind control at play. So, in 1950, USA breaks the Nuremberg Code and gives a combination of amphetamines and barbiturates to suspected double agents on Japanese soil. American fear of USSR perfecting mind control strengthens when prisoners of war in the Korean War, 3 years later, confess to committing war crimes. The United States government makes a public statement saying that these statements were taken in a coerced or drug-induced state and mind control has been at play. The CIA then asks for a pass to conduct tests on a larger scale to perfect technology or the chemistry, and then they get the green light from President Harry S. Truman in 1953. So, the CIA started administrating LSD, amphetamines, and barbiturates alongside hypnosis procedures to volunteers in academic institutions, and studies done under CIA's Technical Service Staff, TSS. The next expansion in testing was to prison inmates and psychiatric institutions. Prison inmates were actually rewarded with the drug of their choice for trying the drugs that they were giving. At this point in the campaign, the CIA was still getting voluntary consent on these tests, even in psychiatric institutions. The trouble began, and things started to get darker, when the drugs are administered unwittingly to CIA's TSS by the TSS itself. They warn each other that they'll be drugged by fellow TSS agents, in order to get the results that they need. One of these tests went horribly wrong when Frank Olson, a biological warfare scientist who was working with the CIA, is unwittingly given LSD in a meeting in rural Maryland. They slip it in his liquor. He had what we now call a bad trip. And they didn't know what a bad trip was. That was never in their vocabulary. So instead of moving him to an emergency room, he was moved to New York for observation under an allergist. He ended up falling off a window at the Statler Hotel 5 days later. The US government saw the promise that this research showed during the observations, and Lashbrook and Gottlieb, who were who were the leaders of TSS at the time and leading MK Ultra, had a bump in their resources, and the testing was expanded to civilians. Now here's where things get complete tinfoil hat, and the unfortunate part is it's not just the internet speaking to me. History Channel has done a documentary on this with the same facts. I verified it with them. There's a bunch of other National Geographic things as well. Check out, take your time, watch whatever you want. Fuck. So the CIA proceeded to test a combination of barbiturates, LSD, and amphetamines covertly on civilians who were lured into safe houses by prostitutes on CIA payroll and then observed for a given period of time through a one-way mirror. The arrangement was made to make sure that if someone suspects that the government's intent, they would sound crazy and the story was too embarrassing to share altogether. Throughout this time, government is constantly giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to academic institutions to continue testing and evaluate possible mind control that these drugs could give a gateway to. The worst deal in this entire ordeal comes to patients in mental health care institutions who had delusions of government control without their knowledge or consent. Pain, verbal threats, sensory deprivation, and physical restriction, along with isolation with combination of heavy doses of drugs, was standard in the test subjects from psychiatric care hospitals. The worst of these happened in Canada under Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron felt comfortable destroying entire mental images of self and reconstructing the person from the ground up, which is a treatment that caught the eyes of the CIA and they wanted to invest in it. He was paid to mislead patients into signing for his treatment. I believe the file is called MK Ultra SubProject 68. It deals with his particular methods involving misleading patients with depression or anxiety disorders into believing they need psychiatric confinement, and then reducing them to vegetables using shock therapy, verbal threats, physical abuse, and even suspected sexual abuse, and then using operant conditioning with drugs as reward. One of the more horrible accounts of his research at the Alman Institution involves a 19-year-old honor student reduced to a thumb-sucking child who would pee on the floor and forget what potty training is. About 80 people sued him afterwards in 1977 when the Ford administration was looking into CIA for these mass rights violations. I think there's about 6,000 pages of just data on the MK Ultra, which is classified CIA documents that are online. They're verified. I verified them. Take it with a pinch of salt. But no, I mean, don't take my word for it. You can verify them through multiple sources. History Channel being one of them. I'll send the link down in the description. In conclusion, when your child asks, I don't know if you have a child, if you ever have a child and then your child asks, "Mother, should I trust the government?" the answer is no, and then you show them this episode. So as I said, I'm gonna link to the Black Vault page, which gives you 60,000 pages of just declassified documents about MK Ultra by the CIA. And that's what they're comfortable with you knowing. Just so you know, a lot of it has been blacked out. There's about 80 cases which were fought against Donald Ewan Cameron. You'll find them very easily. It's not a difficult task to find cases against him. And that's it. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to this channel. If you're on SoundCloud, please follow us on SoundCloud. Support us on Patreon if you think the content is worth it. And, well, stay yourself, I guess. Goodbye.